In the vast expanse of the Galactic Confederation, where 1,000 alien species had learned to coexist through careful diplomacy and mutual respect for each other's military prowess, there existed an unspoken rule that had governed interstellar relations for over 3 millennia. Every species had their elite warriors, their most feared units that other civilizations would acknowledge with a mixture of respect and caution. The Krillian death squads could tear through reinforced titanium with their bare claws. The Zephyrian storm riders could manipulate gravity itself to crush their enemies. The Vorthan mind breakers could shatter the psyche of entire enemy battalions with a single thought. Each race took pride in their ultimate warriors, and challenges between these elite forces were not uncommon. A way to settle disputes, test strength, and maintain the delicate balance of power that kept the galaxy from descending into chaos. But there was one species whose elite units were never challenged. Not once in the 57 years since humanity had joined the Galactic Confederation had any alien warrior, no matter how confident or battle-hardened, stepped forward to face humanity's most lethal forces in single combat or unit engagement. It wasn't fear exactly, though that played a part. It was something deeper, more primal. Something that made even the most aggressive alien predators pause and reconsider when humans mentioned their special forces. The galaxy was about to discover why even the most bloodthirsty alien warriors refused to challenge humanity's most lethal units. And the revelation would forever change how every species in the Confederation viewed the seemingly fragile bipedal creatures from the small blue planet called Earth. The truth was more terrifying than any alien could imagine, and it all began with a simple diplomatic gathering that was about to go very, very wrong. The crystalline spires of Nexus Station pierced the void like frozen lightning, their surfaces reflecting the light of 3 distant suns in prismatic cascades that painted the metal corridors in shifting rainbows. Deep within the station's diplomatic quarter, representatives from 47 species had gathered for what was supposed to be a routine trade agreement discussion. The air recycling systems worked overtime to accommodate the diverse atmospheric needs of the assembled delegates, creating pockets of different gases that shimmered like heat mirages where they met. Ambassador Chunwei represented humanity at the gathering, her slight frame dwarfed by the towering Krillian delegate whose chitinous exoskeleton gleamed like polished obsidian. To her left sat the ethereal Zephyrian ambassador, its form constantly shifting between solid and gaseous states, while across the curved conference table, the insectoid Vorthans clicked their mandibles in what their species considered polite conversation. The meeting had been proceeding smoothly for the better part of 6 standard hours. Trade routes were being established, resource-sharing agreements were being drafted, and cultural exchange programs were being planned. It was the kind of routine diplomacy that kept the Galactic Confederation functioning. Boring, methodical, but essential work that prevented the kind of misunderstandings that could escalate into system-wide conflicts. That's when everything went sideways. The trouble started with Commander Thexvar, the Krillian military liaison who had remained silent throughout most of the proceedings. Krillians were a proud warrior race, evolved from apex predators on a world where everything wanted to kill everything else. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with razor-sharp claws that could slice through most known metals and exoskeletons that could withstand direct hits from plasma weapons. Their elite death squads were legendary throughout the galaxy, feared for their ability to tear through enemy formations like tissue paper. This is all well and good. Thexvar suddenly interjected, his voice a rumbling growl that made the translator struggle to find appropriate human equivalents. But there's an elephant in the room that no one wants to address. The phrase didn't translate well, and several aliens looked confused. The Zephyrian ambassador's form solidified slightly as it focused on the Krillian. Please clarify your statement, Commander. Thexvar's compound eyes fixed on Ambassador Chun, who maintained her diplomatic smile despite the sudden tension that filled the room. I'm talking about the humans and their so-called special forces. For 57 years, our species have shared challenges, tested our warriors against one another, maintained the balance of power through honorable combat. It's how we prove our worth, how we establish respect among equals. The other delegates shifted uncomfortably. This was dangerous territory. Military challenges between species were indeed common, but they were usually arranged through proper diplomatic channels, not brought up during trade negotiations. But the humans, Thexvar continued, rising to his full height, his claws scraping against the conference table. They hide behind mystery and reputation. Their special forces are spoken of in whispers, as if they were some kind of mythical beings. I say it's time to strip away the mystery. Let them prove themselves in honorable combat, as every other species has done. The silence that followed was deafening. Ambassador Chun felt the weight of 46 pairs of eyes, sensors, and other sensory organs focused on her. She had been dreading this moment since accepting her posting. Every human diplomat was briefed on this possibility, and every one of them hoped they would never have to face it. "Commander Thexvar," she said carefully, her voice steady despite the ice forming in her stomach, "I appreciate your interest in learning more about human military capabilities. However, I'm not sure this is the appropriate forum for such discussions." Appropriate forum? The Krillian's laugh was like gravel being ground under a boot. "Ambassador, with all due respect to your species, every race here has demonstrated the capabilities of their elite forces. The Vorthans showed us their mind breakers when the Hellion pirates threatened the outer colonies. The Zephyrian storm riders saved the Proxima shipping lanes from the Void Runners. Even my own death squads have proven their worth defending the neutral zones." Thexvar leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow across the table. "But humans? You speak of your special forces in whispers and vague terms. Navy SEALs, Green Berets, SS, names without meaning. How are we supposed to respect warriors we've never seen fight?" The Vorthan delegate, a being that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a spider, clicked its mandibles thoughtfully. "The commander raises a valid point. In Vorthan culture, warrior strength must be proven, not assumed." "Indeed," added the Hellion representative, her scaled head nodding in agreement. "The Hellion Guard has faced the elite forces of 17 species in formal combat. We have won some battles, lost others, but always gained respect through the testing of arms." Ambassador Chin closed her eyes for a brief moment, running through her options. She could deflect, try to change the subject, suggest that such matters be discussed through military rather than diplomatic channels. But she could see the mood of the room. The other delegates were genuinely curious now, and some were beginning to look suspicious. 46 species had shared their military secrets, had proven their elite forces in combat, had demonstrated their capabilities openly. Only humanity had remained silent. "Very well," Chin said finally, opening her eyes and meeting Thexvar's gaze directly. "If you truly wish to understand why our special forces are spoken of differently than others, I will explain. But I want it understood that this information is being shared at your request, despite my strong recommendation against it." The room fell silent except for the humming of the station's life support systems. Even the Zephyrian had solidified completely, its gaseous form taking on an almost crystalline appearance. Chin activated her personal communication device and spoke quietly into it in rapid human English. The other delegates watched with growing anticipation as she exchanged several messages with someone on the other end. After a few minutes, she closed the device and looked around the room. "I have just spoken with Admiral Harrison of the Human Defense Force," she announced. "He has agreed to provide a demonstration of human special forces capabilities, given the expressed interest of our Confederation partners. However, he has requested that this demonstration take place in a controlled environment, away from the main station." Thexvar's eyes glittered with satisfaction. "Excellent. My death squad is ready whenever your warriors are prepared to face them." "Commander," Chun said, her voice taking on a warning tone, "I want to be very clear about something. The Admiral has agreed to a demonstration, not a combat challenge. Our special forces will show their capabilities, but they will not be engaging in direct combat with any alien forces." "What kind of demonstration could possibly?" Thexvar began, but Chin cut him off. "The kind that will answer all of your questions," she said firmly. "Believe me, after you see what you've asked to see, you'll understand why no alien warrior has ever challenged humanity's most lethal units to combat." The Krillian commander's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement or frustration. "Very well, Ambassador. But if your demonstration doesn't satisfy my curiosity about human capabilities, I reserve the right to issue a formal challenge." She nodded slowly. "That is, of course, your right under Confederation law. But, Commander, I hope for your sake that won't be necessary." 2 hours later, the entire diplomatic party had been transported to a desolate asteroid in the outer system. The rocky surface was pocked with craters from ancient meteor impacts, and the thin atmosphere couldn't support most life forms without environmental suits. It was the perfect place for a military demonstration, isolated, contained, and far from anything that could be damaged if things went wrong. The delegates huddled inside a pressurized observation dome that had been hastily erected by station personnel. Through the transparent aluminum walls, they could see the stark landscape stretching out for kilometers in all directions. In the distance, a human shuttle was approaching, its hull gleaming silver against the star-filled backdrop of space. "I don't understand," muttered the Hellion delegate. "What could they possibly demonstrate on a barren asteroid? There's nothing here to fight, nothing to test their skills against." Fexvar remained silent, but his compound eyes were fixed on the approaching shuttle. Something about Ambassador Chen's tone had made him uneasy, though he would never admit it. In his experience, prey species, and despite their recent technological advances, humans were still essentially prey species, didn't speak with such confidence unless they had some hidden advantage. The shuttle touched down about a kilometer from the observation dome, and the delegates watched as the cargo bay doors opened. A small group of humans emerged, perhaps 12 individuals, all wearing identical black uniforms with minimal equipment. At this distance, they looked unremarkable, just another species soldiers preparing for a routine training exercise. "Is that it?" Fexvar asked, his voice heavy with disappointment. A dozen humans with no heavy weapons, no powered armor, no obvious enhancements? "Ambassador, with respect, I fail to see how this addresses my concerns about human military capabilities." Chen didn't respond immediately. She was listening to something in her earpiece, nodding occasionally. Finally, she looked up at the assembled delegates. "Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings," she announced, "what you are about to witness is a standard infiltration and target elimination exercise conducted by a mixed unit of human special forces operatives. The scenario is as follows. Hostile forces have taken control of this facility. You, the delegates, are their hostages, and the facility itself must be secured without causing harm to the hostages or damaging critical infrastructure." "Wait," the Vorthin delegate interjected, its mandibles clicking rapidly. "You're saying they intend to assault this position? But we're inside. How is this a demonstration rather than an actual attack?" "Because," Chun said calmly, "the exercise parameters specify that they must complete their mission without any of you being aware of their presence until the moment they choose to reveal themselves. Think of it as the ultimate test of stealth and precision." The Zephyrian ambassador's form flickered. "Impossible. This dome has motion sensors, heat detectors, atmospheric monitoring equipment. The station's security systems are among the most advanced in the Confederation. Nothing could approach this position without triggering multiple alarms." "The exercise began 30 seconds ago," Chen announced, checking her chronometer. "The objective is to penetrate this facility, neutralize all hostiles while avoiding harm to hostages, and extract critical intelligence from the command center." The delegates immediately began looking around nervously, checking their own sensors and scanning the landscape visible through the dome walls. Several species had enhanced senses that could detect movement, heat signatures, or even electromagnetic fields generated by most technologies. "Nothing. This is ridiculous," Fexvar growled. "I can see the entire perimeter. Those humans are still standing next to their shuttle." "If this is some kind of joke, Commander," Chen interrupted, "I suggest you look again." Fexvar turned his attention back to the shuttle. The humans were gone. His compound eyes, capable of detecting movement across a spectrum of frequencies invisible to most species, swept the landscape frantically. The asteroid's surface was broken and uneven, with plenty of places to hide, but his sensors should have detected heat signatures, electromagnetic fields from their equipment. "Something?" "Where are they?" he demanded. "Executing their mission," Chen replied simply. The next 15 minutes were among the most unsettling that any of the delegates had ever experienced. They were surrounded by some of the most advanced detection equipment in the galaxy, protected by security systems that could identify a single bacterium out of place, watched over by individuals whose senses had evolved to detect the slightest anomaly in their environment. And yet, gradually, they began to realize that death was moving through their facility like a silent wind. It started with small things. A security guard status light going from green to red for just a moment before returning to normal. A corridor camera that flickered almost imperceptibly. A ventilation grate that was open when sensors said it should be closed. "Your security personnel?" the Vorthin delegate asked nervously. They are merely unconscious, yes? This is a simulation. Chen consulted her earpiece again. The exercise parameters specify non-lethal takedowns when possible. Your security teams are being treated as hostile forces that need to be neutralized. Treated as. Fexvar's voice had lost much of its earlier bravado. You mean this isn't a simulation? No, Commander. It's a real-time demonstration of human special forces capabilities under combat conditions. The observation dome fell silent, except for the humming of life support and the occasional click of nervous delegates checking their equipment. On their sensors, they could see security teams throughout the facility going offline one by one. Not all at once, which would suggest a coordinated assault, but individually, silently, as if some invisible predator was moving through the facility, picking them off one by one. Impossible, whispered the Hellion delegate. Our guards are equipped with proximity alarms, automatic distress beacons, continuous monitoring systems. If they were attacked, we would know instantly. Unless, Chun said quietly, the attackers were skilled enough to disable all of those systems before their targets even knew they were in danger. That's when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing the observation dome in an eerie red glow. Several delegates immediately activated their personal defense systems, energy fields, and protective barriers flickering to life around them. Stay calm. Chin's voice cut through the rising panic. Remember, you are designated as hostages, not targets. No harm will come to you. How can you be certain? Fexvar demanded, his claws extended and ready for combat. If your warriors are as lethal as you claim, what's to stop them from making a mistake? Chin's smile was visible even in the red emergency lighting. Because they don't make mistakes, Commander. That's why they're called Special Forces. The observation dome's door, which had been sealed and locked with multiple independent security systems, opened with a soft hiss. The delegates spun toward the entrance, weapons and defensive systems ready, expecting to see black-clad human soldiers rushing in. Instead, a single figure stepped through the doorway. He was tall for human, but unremarkable compared to most of the alien delegates. His uniform was black and seemed to absorb the emergency lighting, making him appear as little more than a shadow with eyes. On his chest, a small patch read Harrison in white letters. Good evening, Admiral Harrison said politely, his voice carrying the kind of calm authority that suggested he was completely comfortable despite being surrounded by some of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. I apologize for the dramatic presentation, but Ambassador Chun insisted that a proper demonstration would be more effective than a simple briefing. Fexvar's compound eyes fixed on the human admiral. Where are your soldiers? The ones who disabled our security. Harrison's expression didn't change. They're still executing their mission parameters, securing the facility, gathering intelligence, ensuring all hostile forces have been neutralized. He paused. They'll reveal themselves when the exercise is complete. Still executing? The Vorthan delegate's mandibles clicked rapidly. But they've been inside for nearly 20 minutes. Surely they would have encountered resistance by now. Oh, they have, Harrison confirmed. Your security teams put up quite a fight. Very professional. It took almost 3 minutes longer than our simulations predicted. 3 minutes longer? Fexvar's voice rose. Are you saying your soldiers neutralized the entire facility security force in under 20 minutes? 17 minutes, 12 seconds, to be precise, Harrison replied. Though, I should clarify, they didn't neutralize the entire security force. They bypassed 73% of your guards entirely. The mission parameters only required neutralizing security personnel who might interfere with the primary objectives. The implications of this statement slowly sank in. The facility had been protected by over 200 highly trained security personnel from various species, equipped with advanced weapons and detection equipment, operating in a controlled environment designed to prevent exactly this kind of infiltration. And a dozen humans had cut through them like they weren't even there. Impossible, Fexvar said again, but his voice had lost much of its conviction. Would you like to see the mission recordings? Harrison offered, producing a small holographic projector. I think it might help explain why alien warriors don't typically challenge our special forces to direct combat. He activated the device, and suddenly, the observation dome was filled with three-dimensional images showing the assault from multiple perspectives. The delegates watched in stunned silence as the human operatives moved through the facility like ghosts, appearing and disappearing in ventilation systems, through walls, in places where no being should have been able to go. They saw a Krillian guard who never knew what hit him as a human operator emerge from a ceiling panel directly above him, applied some kind of nerve pinch that dropped the warrior instantly, then vanished back into the overhead systems before the guard's body even hit the floor. They watched as two human soldiers somehow passed through what appeared to be a solid wall, neutralized for Hellion guards in complete silence, and then seemed to simply fade away when reinforcements arrived 30 seconds later. Most disturbing of all, they saw footage from security cameras that showed empty corridors where humans had clearly been walking just moments before. The soldiers weren't just stealthy, they seemed to be able to confuse the very sensors designed to detect them. Ow! The Zephyrian ambassador asked, its form flickering between states as it tried to process what it was seeing. How was this level of stealth possible? Our sensors should detect them regardless of their camouflage technology. Harrison's smile was small, but cold. Who said anything about camouflage technology? Before anyone could ask what he meant, 12 figures seemed to simply materialize out of thin air around the observation dome. Not from doorways or hidden passages, they just appeared, as if they had been standing there invisible the entire time. The delegates found themselves surrounded by the human special forces operatives and finally understood why no alien warrior had ever challenged these beings to combat. It wasn't fear of losing that kept them away. It was the absolute certainty that they would never see the attack coming. The 12 human operatives stood motionless around the observation dome, and the alien delegates finally understood what true predators looked like. These weren't the flashy warriors they were used to, beings who announced their presence with roars or dramatic displays of power. These humans were something far more terrifying. Hunters who had evolved beyond the need to intimidate their prey because they had perfected the art of being invisible until the moment of the kill. Commander Thexvar, whose species had ruled their homeworld through pure physical dominance, found himself backing away from the nearest human operative despite every instinct screaming at him to stand and fight. The human was unremarkable by galactic standards, shorter than most species, lacking natural weapons or obvious physical enhancements. But something about the way he stood, the absolute stillness of his posture, the complete lack of wasted movement, triggered recognition patterns in Thexvar's predator brain that had been dormant for millions of years of evolution. This was what his ancestors had feared in the deep caves of their homeworld. This was the nightmare that hunted the hunters. You wanted to know about human special forces, Admiral Harrison said conversationally, as if he wasn't surrounded by some of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy who were all now backing away from his soldiers. The truth is, most humans don't really understand them either. We try to explain them in terms other species can grasp: elite soldiers, special operations, advanced training. But that's not really what they are. The Vorthan delegate, whose compound eyes could track movement in multiple directions simultaneously, realized with growing horror that he couldn't actually tell where the human operatives were looking. Their eyes seemed to track everything and nothing, constantly processing threats and opportunities with a calculating intensity that made him feel like prey being evaluated for consumption. What are they then? The Zephyrian ambassador asked, its form cycling rapidly between solid and gas as its species' natural defense mechanisms triggered. Harrison considered the question for a moment. Have any of you studied human evolutionary history? Several delegates nodded. Humanity's rapid advancement from a primitive species to galactic citizens in just a few centuries had been the subject of extensive academic research. Most species had taken millions of years to develop space travel. Humans had done it in a few thousand. Then, you know that humans evolved as persistent hunters, Harrison continued. Not the fastest predators, not the strongest, not the most heavily armed. We were the species that would track our prey for days, weeks if necessary, until it collapsed from exhaustion. We didn't need to be faster than our food. We just needed to be more patient, more determined, and absolutely relentless. The human operative nearest to Thexvar shifted slightly, and the Krillian commander felt his exoskeleton actually crack under the stress of involuntary muscle contractions. The movement had been barely perceptible, just a minor adjustment in stance, but it had been executed with such perfect efficiency that it conveyed volumes about the human's readiness for violence. Most species developed their elite warriors by enhancing what they were already good at, Harrison explained. Krillians made their strongest fighters even stronger. Vorthans enhanced their psychic abilities. Zephyrians learned to manipulate matter at the molecular level. But humans? We took our natural hunting instincts and refined them into something that transcends ordinary military training. Admiral Harrison activated another holographic display, this one showing statistical data that made several delegates take sharp breaths of whatever atmospheric mixture they required. Human special forces don't just train to be soldiers, he said. They train to be apex predators in any environment, against any opponent, under any circumstances. A Navy SEAL can operate underwater for hours without breathing apparatus, in temperatures that would kill most life forms, under pressure that would crush normal humans. Green Berets can learn any language, adapt to any culture, become invisible in any society within weeks. SAS operatives can track a single individual across continents using methods that most species would consider supernatural. The hologram showed training footage that made the alien delegates increasingly uncomfortable. They watched humans learning to slow their heartbeats to near-death levels, to control their body temperature so precisely that thermal sensors couldn't detect them, to move so silently that their own footsteps couldn't be heard even by their enhanced senses. But that's just the physical training, Harrison said quietly. The real difference is psychological. He gestured to one of his operatives, a woman who couldn't have weighed more than 60 kilograms and stood barely 5.5 feet tall. Sergeant Martinez here has been awake for 73 hours. In that time, she has infiltrated 4 different secured facilities, neutralized 27 opponents without causing permanent injury, gathered intelligence on 3 separate operations, and completed a cross-country navigation exercise in hostile terrain. Sergeant Martinez remained perfectly still, her breathing so controlled that her chest barely moved. Her eyes were fixed on some point in the distance, but every delegate in the room could sense that she was simultaneously aware of every movement, every breath, every heartbeat in her vicinity. "How is that possible?" the Hellion delegate whispered. "No biological entity can function at peak efficiency without sleep for that duration." Human Special Forces operatives trained their minds the same way they train their bodies, Harrison replied. They learned to partition their consciousness, to remain alert while allowing parts of their brain to rest. They can enter a meditative state that provides the same benefits as sleep while remaining fully combat ready. Some can even continue complex operations while sleepwalking. Thexvar forced himself to step forward, his warrior pride struggling against every instinct that was screaming at him to flee. "Training is one thing, Admiral, but in actual combat, against experienced opponents with superior physical capabilities." "Tell me, Commander," Harrison interrupted, "how many of your death squad members have killed another being with their bare hands?" The question caught Thexvar off guard. "All of them, of course. It's part of their basic training." "How many have killed 100 beings?" "Some of the veterans, perhaps. Those who've seen extensive combat." 1,000. Thexvar hesitated. "That would be unusual, even for our most experienced warriors." Harrison nodded to another operative, an older human with gray hair and scars that were visible even through his uniform. "Master Chief Kowalski has confirmed kills numbering in the thousands. Not with advanced weapons or powered armor, but with conventional human military equipment. Sometimes with improvised weapons. Sometimes with no weapons at all." The old soldier's eyes met Thexvar's for just a moment, and the Krillian commander felt something he hadn't experienced since he was a juvenile hiding from the great predators of his homeworld. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the recognition that he was in the presence of something that could kill him without effort, without emotion, without even really paying attention to the act. "The difference," Harrison continued, "is that human special forces don't just train to fight. They train to win. Always, under any circumstances, no matter the cost. They don't have honor codes that prevent them from using certain tactics. They don't have instinctual behaviors that make them predictable. They have one mission: complete the objective, eliminate the threats, protect the assets. Everything else is negotiable." The Zephyrian ambassador managed to solidify enough to speak. "Surely there are limits to their capabilities. No being is invincible." Harrison's expression grew thoughtful. "You're right, of course. Human Special Forces operatives are not invincible. They can be injured, killed, defeated under the right circumstances. But here's what makes them different from every other elite force in the galaxy. They don't fight fair." He activated another hologram, this one showing tactical scenarios. When a Krillian death squad faces superior numbers, they charge forward and rely on their physical advantages. When Vorthan mind breakers encounter resistance to their psychic abilities, They attempt to overpower that resistance through force. When Zephyrian Storm Riders meet an enemy they can't defeat directly, they attempt to outmaneuver them using their matter manipulation. The scenarios played out in a holographic display, showing various alien elite forces engaging in what looked like honorable combat, according to their species traditions. Human special forces don't do any of that, Harrison said. When they encounter superior numbers, they don't attack, they wait. Sometimes for hours, days, weeks, until the enemy makes a mistake or reveals a weakness. When they face opponents with abilities they can't match directly, they don't try to match them. They change the rules of engagement entirely. The hologram shifted to show human operations that made the alien delegates increasingly uncomfortable. They watched as human soldiers bypassed heavily defended positions by simply waiting for shift changes. They saw operatives who defeated psychically gifted opponents by using mundane distractions that couldn't be detected by mental powers. They observed teams that neutralized technologically superior enemies by exploiting psychological weaknesses that had nothing to do with combat capability. Your elite forces fight like warriors, Harrison said. Ours hunt like predators. And there's a difference that goes beyond mere tactics. Sergeant Martinez spoke for the first time, her voice so quiet that the alien delegates had to strain to hear her. Warriors fight to prove themselves. Predators kill to survive. When those two meet in combat, the predator wins because the warrior is fighting the wrong battle. The observation dome fell silent, except for the nervous breathing and movement of the alien delegates. They were beginning to understand something that chilled them to their core. Human special forces weren't just elite soldiers. They were an entirely different category of being, something that had evolved beyond conventional military thinking into something that was more like a force of nature. Commander Thexvar straightened his massive frame, trying to recapture some of his earlier confidence. You speak of hunting and predation as if it makes you invincible. But every predator can become prey under the right circumstances. Master Chief Kowalski smiled for the first time, and the expression was more terrifying than any threat. You're absolutely right, Commander. Every predator can become prey. The difference is we're the predators who learned to hunt other predators. What does that mean? The Vorthan delegate asked. It means, Harrison said, that human special forces don't just train to fight enemy soldiers or defend against conventional attacks. They train to hunt and kill other elite forces. Your death squads, mindbreakers, storm riders, we've studied all of them. We know their strengths, their weaknesses, their tactics, their psychology. We've developed specific countermeasures for every type of elite warrior in the galaxy. The holographic display showed training scenarios that made several delegates gasp. Human operatives were practicing against simulated alien elite forces, learning to exploit the specific vulnerabilities of each species' warrior class. They watched as humans developed tactics specifically designed to counter Krillian exoskeletons, Vorthan psychic abilities, Zephyrian matter manipulation. This is why no alien warrior has ever challenged our special forces to direct combat, Harrison explained. It's not because they're afraid of losing, though they should be. It's because deep down, every elite warrior in the galaxy recognizes what human special forces really are. And what is that? Thexvar demanded, though his voice had lost most of its aggressive edge. The thing that hunts the hunters, Harrison replied simply. The nightmare that even nightmares fear. One of the human operatives, who had been standing so still that several delegates had forgotten he was there, suddenly moved. Not toward any of the aliens, not in any threatening manner, but simply shifted position with such fluid, controlled precision that it was like watching a machine designed to look human. The movement lasted less than a second, but in that instant, every alien delegate realized that the operative had evaluated them all as potential threats, calculated the most efficient way to neutralize each of them, and positioned himself to execute those calculations if necessary, all while appearing to do nothing more than shift his weight. We should return to the station, Admiral Harrison said, checking his chronometer. The diplomatic meeting is scheduled to resume in 2 hours, and I'm sure you have much to discuss. As the human operatives began to file out of the observation dome, moving with the same ghostly silence that had marked their arrival, Commander Thexvar found his voice again. Admiral, he called out. Earlier, I mentioned issuing a formal challenge if this demonstration didn't satisfy my curiosity about human capabilities. Harrison paused at the doorway. Yes. Consider my curiosity thoroughly satisfied, Thexvar said quietly. No challenge will be forthcoming. Harrison nodded politely. A wise decision, Commander. I hope the remainder of your stay at Nexus Station is peaceful and productive. As the humans departed, the alien delegates were left alone in the observation dome with the emergency lighting and their own racing thoughts. They had come seeking answers about human military capabilities, and they had gotten them. But the answers had raised far more questions than they had resolved, and all of those questions were deeply unsettling. The Vorthan delegate was the first to break the silence. Did anyone else notice that during the entire demonstration, we never actually saw them do anything impossible? No exotic technologies, no supernatural abilities, nothing that violated known physical laws. Which somehow makes it worse, the Hellion delegate replied, her scales rippling with nervous energy. If they had shown us some kind of advanced technology or special powers, we could understand it, maybe even develop countermeasures. But this was just humans being humans, except more so. The Zephyrian ambassador's form had stabilized, but it was a brittle, crystalline structure that reflected its deep unease. They've weaponized their own nature, turned their evolutionary advantages into something that transcends military doctrine. Thexvar remained silent, lost in thought. His species prided itself on being apex predators, the ultimate warrior race. They had conquered their homeworld through pure physical dominance, and had maintained their position in galactic society through demonstrated military superiority. But what he had witnessed today wasn't military superiority. It was something else entirely, something that made military superiority irrelevant. The humans hadn't defeated their security forces through superior firepower or advanced technology. They had simply outthought them, outmaneuvered them, made them irrelevant. And that was the most terrifying realization of all. Because if human special forces could make the galaxy's elite warriors irrelevant without even trying, what did that say about the rest of them? As the delegates prepared to return to Nexus Station, each of them was grappling with the same uncomfortable truth. They had spent decades building their military doctrines around the assumption that they were dealing with various types of warriors. They were now realizing that they had been wrong. Humanity didn't have warriors. Humanity had something much, much worse. The news of what had happened at the diplomatic demonstration spread through the Galactic Confederation like wildfire, but not in the way anyone expected. There were no official reports, no formal military assessments, no diplomatic communiques detailing human special forces capabilities. Instead, the truth spread through whispered conversations in private quarters, coded messages between military liaisons, and the kind of informal intelligence networks that existed beneath the surface of official diplomatic relations. Within 72 hours of the demonstration, every major military command in the galaxy had received some version of the story. Within a week, even civilian populations on distant worlds were sharing rumors about what the human delegates had revealed on that desolate asteroid. But the most telling response came from the galaxy's elite warriors themselves, the very beings who were supposedly most qualified to evaluate what they had heard. Not one of them asked for additional details. Not one requested verification of the claims. Not one suggested that the reports might be exaggerated or inaccurate, because deep down, they all knew the stories were true. On Corellia Prime, Commander Thexvar stood before the assembled Death Squad leaders in the Great Hall of their military complex. The hall was carved from the living rock of the planet's highest mountain, its walls decorated with the skulls of conquered enemies and the weapons of fallen warriors. It was a place where Corellian military might have been planned and celebrated for over 2 millennia. Today, it felt more like a mausoleum. Report, Commander, ordered General Keth Morg, the supreme leader of the Death Squads. His exoskeleton was scarred from 100 battles, and his compound eyes held the cold calculation of a being who had never lost a military engagement. What did you learn about human special forces capabilities? Thexvar had been dreading this moment since returning from Nexus Station. How could he explain to the most accomplished warriors of his species that everything they believed about military supremacy was wrong? How could he tell them that there were beings in the galaxy who made the feared Death Squads look like primitive savages playing at war? The humans, he began carefully, are not what we expected. Explain. General Keth Morg's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. They are predators, General. Not like us. We evolved to dominate through strength and aggression. They evolved to hunt through patience and intelligence. Their special forces are not enhanced warriors. They are perfected hunters. The assembled death squad leaders exchanged glances. The concept of patience as a military virtue was foreign to Krillian thinking. Their entire tactical doctrine was based on overwhelming force applied as quickly and decisively as possible. Give me specifics, Commander. Numbers, capabilities, weaknesses we can exploit. Fexvar's claws scraped against the stone floor as he struggled to find words. General, they infiltrated and neutralized the entire security force of a Confederation facility in 17 minutes. They did this without advanced technology, without exotic weapons, without any apparent advantages beyond training and methodology. Impossible. No force could penetrate Confederation security that quickly. I watched the recordings, General. They didn't penetrate the security, they made it irrelevant. They moved through the facility as if the security measures simply didn't apply to them. Guards were neutralized without ever knowing they were under attack. Detection systems registered nothing. Alarm protocols never triggered. General Kethmore was silent for a long moment. Show me these recordings. Fexvar activated a holographic projector, and the great hall filled with images of the human demonstration. The assembled death squad leaders watched in growing discomfort as 12 unremarkable humans moved through a secured facility like ghosts, appearing and disappearing at will, neutralizing threats with an efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. When the recordings ended, the hall was silent except for the breathing of warriors who were beginning to understand that they might not be the apex predators they had always believed themselves to be. Analysis. General Keth Morg ordered. Captain Vextor, the Death Squad's chief tactical officer, spoke first. Their movement patterns suggest extensive training in environments we don't fully understand. They seem to be able to predict the behavior of security personnel with uncanny accuracy. More than that, added Commander Rexhan, whose squad specialized in urban warfare. They appear to have trained specifically against Confederation security protocols. They knew exactly which systems to disable and in what order to avoid triggering backup measures. But how? General Keth Moore demanded. How could they have such detailed knowledge of our security systems? Texvar ansvaret kvietlu. Because they've been studying us, General. All of us. For decades. They know our tactics, our capabilities, our weaknesses. They've been preparing for this. Preparing for what? For the day someone challenges them directly. The implications of this statement settled over the assembled warriors like a shroud. The humans hadn't just demonstrated superior special forces capabilities. They had revealed that they had been studying and preparing countermeasures for every elite force in the galaxy. On Vorthan Hiveworld 7, the Mind Breaker Collective was experiencing something unprecedented: doubt. The Vorthan's psychic abilities had made them the ultimate interrogators and psychological warriors in the galaxy. They could break the will of entire armies, extract information from the most determined minds, and coordinate their actions with a level of precision that no other species could match. But the recordings from Nexus Station showed human operatives who seemed to operate outside the normal parameters of consciousness that the Mind Breakers relied on to achieve their effects. Prime Breaker Leextera called an emergency session of the collective consciousness, linking the minds of every Mind Breaker in the sector. The psychic web that formed was a thing of terrible beauty. Thousands of individual minds connected in perfect harmony, sharing thoughts and experiences with instantaneous precision. We have observed something troubling, Zewixthra broadcasted to the collective. The human special forces appear to possess mental disciplines that resist our standard techniques. The collective consciousness examined the evidence with the combined analytical power of thousands of trained psychic specialists. What they found was deeply disturbing. Their minds are compartmentalized, observed Breaker Kelneth. They appear to be able to partition their consciousness in ways that would prevent total mental infiltration. More concerning, added Breaker WX Moran, is their ability to maintain operational capacity while in altered states of consciousness. Traditional mind-breaking techniques rely on overwhelming the target's ability to think clearly. These humans seem to operate effectively even when their conscious minds are compromised. The collective examined footage of human operatives in training, learning to function while under extreme psychological stress, mastering meditation techniques that allowed them to maintain awareness while appearing unconscious, developing mental disciplines that bordered on what most species would consider supernatural. Conclusion: HFY requested. The response from the collective was unanimous and chilling. Human special forces have been specifically trained to resist psychic manipulation. Their mental disciplines are designed to counter our abilities. They have studied us and developed countermeasures. But how could they know enough about our capabilities to develop such precise countermeasures? Because one of the younger breakers realized with growing horror, they've been capturing and studying our operatives. The collective consciousness recoiled as the implications became clear. The humans have been secretly analyzing mind-breaker techniques, learning how psychic abilities worked, and developing training regimens specifically designed to produce soldiers who could resist and counter those abilities. Meanwhile, on Zephyria Prime, the Storm Riders were facing their own crisis of confidence. The Zephyrians' ability to manipulate matter at the molecular level had made them the galaxy's premier infiltration specialists. They could pass through solid walls, manipulate atmospheric conditions to become invisible, even alter their own molecular structure to mimic other species. But the human demonstration had shown operatives who achieved similar results through purely mundane means, training, technique, and an understanding of physics that bordered on the intuitive. Master Rider Air THYSS floated in the center of the Storm Rider training facility, her form shifting between solid and gaseous states as she processed what she had learned from the Confederation intelligence reports. "They move like us," she announced to the assembled Storm Riders, "but without our abilities. Impossible repli de rider volxao. No solid form being can achieve our level of stealth and infiltration without matter manipulation capabilities. Yet they do." Air THYSS displayed the Nexus Station recordings for analysis. Watch how they use their environment. They don't phase through walls. They find ways around them that we would never consider because we don't need to. They don't become invisible. They position themselves in places where invisibility is unnecessary. The Storm Riders observed in fascination as human operatives demonstrated infiltration techniques that relied on understanding psychology rather than physics, on exploiting predictable behaviors rather than manipulating matter, on using ordinary physical laws in extraordinary ways. It's as if, Rider Maestero observed, they've learned to think like us without being us. Worse, artis corrected. They've learned to think like us, then found ways to do what we do without relying on the abilities that define us. Which means they understand our capabilities better than we understand theirs. This realization was spreading throughout the Galactic Confederation's military establishments like a virus. The humans hadn't just revealed that they possessed exceptional special forces. They had demonstrated that those forces had been studying and preparing for conflict with every other elite unit in the galaxy. And the more the galaxy's military leaders analyzed the implications, the more disturbing the picture became. On Hellion Command Station, Admiral SYXera was reviewing intelligence reports with her staff when a pattern finally became clear. The Hellion Guard had always prided itself on being the galaxy's most comprehensive intelligence service. They maintained files on every military unit, every weapons system, every tactical doctrine employed by Confederation species. But when they cross-referenced their own intelligence-gathering activities with what they now knew about human special forces capabilities, they made a discovery that chilled them to their cores. "The humans have been watching us watch them," Admiral SYXera announced to her intelligence staff. "Every time we sent operatives to gather information about human military capabilities, they were conducting their own intelligence-gathering operations against our operatives." The implications were staggering. While the galaxy's various intelligence services had been conducting routine surveillance on human military developments, the humans had been conducting counter-surveillance operations that allowed them to study alien intelligence methods, tactical doctrines, and operational capabilities. "Sir," her chief intelligence officer said quietly, "if this is accurate, then the humans know more about our capabilities than we know about theirs." "It's worse than that," Admiral SYXera replied. "They've been using our own intelligence-gathering efforts as training exercises for their special forces. Every time we sent agents to observe them, they were learning how to detect, track, and neutralize our best operatives." The galactic intelligence community was beginning to realize that they had been outplayed on a scale that was almost incomprehensible. While they had been treating humanity as another species to be cataloged and understood, the humans have been treating the rest of the galaxy as a vast training ground for developing the ultimate special forces. But perhaps the most disturbing revelation came from an unexpected source. Dr. Melvaxen, a Zephyrian xenobiologist who had spent decades studying human evolutionary history, published a research paper that sent shockwaves through the academic community. Human special forces, she wrote, represent the culmination of an evolutionary process that began millions of years ago on their homeworld. While other species evolved to fill specific ecological niches, humans evolved to be adaptable. They became generalist predators capable of surviving in any environment and hunting any prey. What we are seeing now is not merely advanced military training. It is the weaponization of humanity's evolutionary advantages. Their special forces have taken the natural human capacity for adaptation and focused it into a form of warfare that transcends conventional military thinking. They're not trying to be better warriors than other species. They're trying to be better humans than other humans, and the result is something that exists outside the normal parameters of galactic military doctrine. The paper concluded with an observation that would be quoted in military academies across the galaxy for generations. Human special forces do not represent an evolution of warfare. They represent an evolution of the warrior. And that evolution has produced something that other species cannot match because they are not human. As this understanding spread through the Confederation, a curious thing began to happen. The various elite forces that had once viewed each other as potential rivals began to develop a strange camaraderie based on shared recognition of what they were all facing. Krillian Death Squad commanders found themselves comparing notes with Vorthan mindbreakers about human psychological warfare techniques. Zephyrian Storm Riders began consulting with Hellion Guard specialists about human infiltration methods. Military leaders who had been professional rivals for decades suddenly found themselves united by a common understanding. They were all prey, and somewhere in the vast reaches of space, on ships and stations and hidden training facilities throughout human territory, the Special Forces operatives who had sparked this galaxy-wide revelation continued their quiet work. They trained in environments that simulated every known alien world. They studied the tactical doctrines of species that most humans had never heard of. They prepared for conflicts that might never come. But if they did, humanity would be ready. Because that's what humans did. They adapted. They learned. They prepared. And when the galaxy finally understood what human special forces really were, they realized that the most terrifying thing about them wasn't their capabilities. It was the fact that they were still evolving. 3 months after the Nexus Station demonstration, the Galactic Confederation found itself facing an unprecedented situation. For the first time in recorded history, military conflicts between member species had virtually ceased. Not because of improved diplomacy or enhanced cooperation, but because no one wanted to risk the possibility that their actions might somehow draw the attention of human special forces. The humans, for their part, seemed oblivious to the effect they were having on galactic military doctrine. They continued their routine diplomatic activities, participated in standard trade negotiations, and maintained their modest military presence at Confederation facilities. To casual observation, nothing had changed about humanity's role in galactic affairs. But beneath the surface, everything had changed. Admiral Harrison received the summons on a Tuesday. The message was formal, diplomatic, and completely routine, a request for his presence at a high-level security briefing on Confederation Central. The kind of meeting that happened hundreds of times each year as military leaders share intelligence and coordinated responses to various galactic threats. What was unusual was the list of attendees. Every elite military commander in the Confederation would be present. Every species' most senior military leaders, intelligence chiefs, and strategic planners had requested to attend what was ostensibly a routine security briefing. It was the largest gathering of military leadership in Confederation history, and officially, it was just another meeting. Harrison knew better. This wasn't a briefing, it was an intervention. The conference chamber on Confederation Central was a masterpiece of diplomatic architecture, designed to accommodate the widely varying physiological and psychological needs of dozens of species simultaneously. The lighting could be adjusted to provide optimal visual conditions for beings with radically different optical systems. The atmospheric controls could create microenvironments that allowed creatures from methane breathing to oxygen dependent to share the same space comfortably. The acoustics were engineered to carry sounds across frequency ranges that span the auditory capabilities of every known species. But despite all this advanced technology, when Admiral Harrison entered the chamber, He felt like he was walking into a tomb. 47 pairs of eyes, sensors, and other sensory organs tracked his movement as he made his way to the designated human seating area. The assembled military leaders represented the combined fighting strength of an entire galaxy. Beings who had commanded armies numbering in the millions, who had planned strategies that determined the fate of entire star systems, who had personally led forces into battles that had shaped the course of galactic history. And they were all staring at him with expressions that ranged from unease to outright fear. General Kethmorg of the Krillian Death Squads spoke first. "Admiral Harrison, thank you for attending this briefing." Harrison nodded politely. "General, though I should mention that I'm curious about the nature of this briefing. The official agenda simply states security matters, but the attendee list suggests something more specific." Indeed, the general's compound eyes fixed on Harrison with uncomfortable intensity. "We have questions about human military doctrine. Questions that have become increasingly urgent following recent demonstrations of human capabilities." Prime Breaker Zoextara's psychic presence touched the edges of the conversation. The Confederation's military leadership has been conducting a comprehensive review of our collective security posture. During this review, certain gaps in our understanding have become apparent. Admiral Harrison settled back in his chair, his expression carefully neutral. "I see. And these gaps relate to human special forces, I assume." "They relate," said Master Rider Ertichoises, her form shifting nervously between states, "to the question of what humanity is actually preparing for." The chamber fell silent, except for the whispered hum of life support systems. Harrison could feel the tension radiating from the assembled military leaders like heat from a star. "I'm not sure I understand the question," he said carefully. Admiral Syxera of the Hellion Guard leaned forward. "Admiral, our intelligence services have been conducting a comprehensive analysis of human military activities over the past several decades. What we've discovered has raised significant concerns about human intentions." Harrison's expression didn't change, but internally, he felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. This was the conversation that every human military leader had hoped would never happen. "Please elaborate," he said. Syxera activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. "Your special forces, Admiral, are not trained like any other military unit we've encountered. They're not trained to fight wars. They're trained to end them. Permanently." The hologram showed tactical analyses that Harrison recognized with growing concern. The aliens have been more thorough than anyone had realized. "Take your Navy SEALs," Syxera continued. "On the surface, they appear to be elite maritime warfare specialists. But when we analyzed their actual training regimens, we discovered something interesting. They spend more time learning how to disrupt planetary infrastructure than they do practicing traditional naval combat." The display shifted to show training records that should have been classified at the highest levels. Harrison wondered grimly how the Hellions had obtained such detailed intelligence. "Your Green Berets," the Admiral continued, "are ostensibly special forces soldiers specializing in unconventional warfare. But their training focuses heavily on psychological operations, cultural manipulation, and what you term hearts and minds campaigns. They're not trained to defeat enemy forces. They're trained to turn entire populations against their own governments." More classified information appeared in the holographic display. Harrison realized with growing dread that the aliens had somehow gained access to training materials that were supposedly secure at the highest classification levels. "Your SAS operatives study linguistics, xenobiology, and cultural anthropology more than they study traditional military tactics. They're not being trained to fight alien soldiers. They're being trained to infiltrate alien societies and operate undetected for extended periods." General Kethmorg's voice carried a note of accusation. "Admiral, when we combine this intelligence with what we observed at your demonstration, a disturbing pattern emerges. Human special forces are not designed to fight wars. They're designed to overthrow civilizations." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Harrison could see the fear and suspicion in the faces around him, and he knew that his next words would either defuse the situation or potentially trigger the very conflict that humanity had been trying to prevent. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "you're absolutely right." The admission sent a wave of shock through the assembled military leaders. Several beings actually recoiled in their seats, while others activated personal defense systems or prepared to call for security. Harrison raised his hand in a calming gesture. but not for the reasons you think. May I explain? General Keth Morg's claws scraped against the conference table. By all means, Admiral. Please explain why humanity has been preparing to destroy our civilizations. Harrison stood and walked to the center of the chamber, positioning himself beneath the holographic display. Because we've been expecting someone else to try to destroy them first. Explain, demanded Prime Breaker Ziwaxthara. Gentlemen, how long do you think human civilization has existed? The question seemed to come from nowhere, and several delegates looked confused. Admiral Syxera answered first. According to your historical records, approximately 12,000 years since the development of agriculture, roughly 6,000 years since the first organized civilizations. And how long, Harrison continued, do you think it will be before humanity encounters a threat that could destroy our civilization entirely? That's impossible to calculate, replied Master Writer HFY. There are too many variables. You're wrong, Harrison said quietly. It's not only possible to calculate, it's inevitable. Based on statistical analysis of galactic history, probability modeling of technological development curves, and extrapolation from current expansion rates, we can state with mathematical certainty that humanity will encounter an existential threat within the next 500 years. The holographic display shifted to show data that made several delegates gasp. Population growth curves, resource depletion models, technological advancement projections, and expansion vector analyses painted a picture of galactic development that was both fascinating and terrifying. The mathematics are inescapable, Harrison explained. As civilizations expand and technology advances, the probability of encountering something that could destroy us approaches certainty. It might be a hostile species from outside the Confederation. It might be an artificial intelligence that achieves consciousness and decides organic life is obsolete. It might be an environmental catastrophe on a galactic scale. It might be something we can't even imagine yet. But it will happen. And when it does, conventional military doctrine will be useless. Harrison gestured to the assembled military leaders. All of your elite forces are designed to fight wars between civilizations at roughly equivalent technological levels. They're magnificent at what they do, but they're not designed to face existential threats. They can't fight enemies that are fundamentally different from anything we've encountered before. So what do you propose? General Keth Morg asked. We prepare for the impossible, Harrison replied. Human special forces aren't trained to overthrow your civilizations. They're trained to save them. All of them, including our own. The holographic display shifted again, showing training scenarios that placed the earlier displays in a completely different context. The delegates watched as human operatives practiced infiltrating not alien governments, but alien societies under occupation by hostile forces. They saw exercises where humans learned to organize resistance movements not to overthrow legitimate governments, but to liberate populations from unknown enemies. Every technique you've identified as potentially subversive has a defensive application, Harrison explained. Our operatives learn to disrupt infrastructure because someday they might need to sabotage enemy installations. They study psychological operations because they might need to counter propaganda campaigns designed to turn species against each other. They master cultural infiltration because they might need to operate in societies that have been compromised by hostile forces. Prime Breaker Ziwaxthara's psychic presence intensified. You're saying that humans have been preparing to defend the entire Galactic Confederation. We've been preparing to defend civilization itself, Harrison corrected. Human, alien, or otherwise. Because when the existential threat finally arrives, and it will arrive, we want to be ready. Admiral Syxera's expression had shifted from suspicion to something approaching awe. The scope of preparation you're describing would require resources and planning on an unprecedented scale. Yes, Harrison agreed, which is why we've been conducting it in secret. If other species knew the full extent of what we're preparing for, it would cause panic on a galactic scale. Fear of hypothetical future threats could destabilize the Confederation more effectively than any actual enemy. But why humans? Asked Master Writer HFY. Why should your species take responsibility for preparing for threats that might affect all of us? Harrison's expression grew thoughtful. Because we're the newest members of the Confederation. Because we don't have the same historical prejudices and rivalries that influence other species. Because we're generalists rather than specialists, which makes us more adaptable to unknown threats. He paused, then continued more quietly. And because we're expendable. The chamber fell silent at this admission. What do you mean? General Kethmore demanded. I mean that if humanity has to sacrifice itself to save galactic civilization, we're prepared to do so. Our special forces aren't just trained to win. They're trained to win even if it costs them everything. Even if it costs us everything. The implications of this statement slowly sank in. The humans weren't preparing to conquer the galaxy. They were preparing to die for it if necessary. This still doesn't explain why your operatives are trained to such an extraordinary level, Admiral HFY pointed out. The capabilities we observe go far beyond what would be needed for conventional defense scenarios. Harrison nodded. Because conventional defense won't be sufficient against an existential threat. We need operatives who can function in any environment, under any conditions, against any enemy. We need soldiers who can adapt to threats that haven't been invented yet. Consider this, he continued. What if the threat is a species that communicates through methods we can't understand? We need operatives who can learn any form of communication. What if the enemy operates in environments that are lethal to most life forms? We need soldiers who can survive anywhere. What if the threat uses weapons that make our current military technology obsolete? We need operatives who can win with nothing but their training and intelligence. The holographic display showed training scenarios that boggled the minds of the assembled military leaders. Humans learning to operate in the vacuum of space without life support. Operatives mastering communication techniques for species that hadn't been discovered yet. Soldiers practicing combat methods for environments that didn't exist. You're training them to fight gods, whispered the Vorthan delegate. We're training them to fight anything, Harrison corrected, including gods, if necessary. General Kethmore's compound eyes fixed on Harrison with a new understanding. This is why no warrior has ever challenged your special forces. It's not fear of defeat. It's recognition that they're preparing for battles none of us can imagine. Precisely, Harrison agreed. Your elite forces are warriors. Ours are guardians. And guardians don't fight for glory or honor or proving themselves. They fight for survival, not just their own, but everyone's. The chamber was quiet for a long moment as the assembled military leaders processed what they had learned. The humans hadn't been preparing for conquest. They had been preparing for sacrifice. They hadn't been developing weapons to use against the Confederation. They had been developing the ultimate defense for it. Finally, Prime Breaker ZYXRA spoke. What do you need from us? Harrison looked surprised. I am sorry. If humanity is preparing to defend galactic civilization against existential threats, what do you need from the rest of us? Harrison exchanged glances with his aides, then looked back at the assembled delegates. Honestly, we need you to keep doing what you're doing. Maintain your civilizations, develop your technologies, explore and expand and create. We need something worth defending, and we need you to trust us, because when the time comes, and it will come, we're going to ask you to do things that won't make sense. We're going to need resources, cooperation, and faith in methods that will seem insane by conventional military standards. Admiral SYXera leaned forward. And if we refuse? Harrison's expression grew grim. Then, we'll try to save you anyway. Because that's what Guardians do. As the meeting concluded and the military leaders began to file out of the chamber, each of them carried with them a new understanding of humanity's role in galactic affairs. The humans weren't conquerors or threats. They were the species that had volunteered to be the galaxy's immune system, and that somehow was even more terrifying than the alternative. 2 years after the revelation at Confederation Central, the galaxy learned that humanity's preparations had not been theoretical. The first sign of trouble came from the Outer Rim territories, where deep space monitoring stations began detecting anomalous readings from beyond the galactic edge. Energy signatures unlike anything in the Confederation databases, movement patterns that suggested massive objects traveling at impossible speeds, and, most disturbing of all, the complete silence of 3 exploration fleets that had been sent to investigate. When the Confederation's combined intelligence services finally assembled enough data to understand what they were facing, the analysis sent shockwaves through every major population center in the galaxy. Something was coming from intergalactic space, something so alien and hostile that it defied conventional understanding. The Devourers, as they came to be known, were unlike anything the galaxy had encountered before. They weren't a species in any recognizable sense. They were more like a force of nature that had achieved consciousness. Vast biomechanical entities that consumed entire solar systems to fuel their expansion, converting matter and energy into more of themselves with ruthless efficiency. They didn't communicate. They didn't negotiate. They didn't even seem to recognize other forms of life as anything more than raw material to be processed. And they were heading directly for the galactic core. The emergency session of the Confederation Council lasted for 14 straight hours as representatives from every member species struggled to comprehend the scope of the threat. Military analysts presented projections that painted an increasingly grim picture of the galaxy's defensive capabilities against an enemy that could literally eat planets. Our combined fleets represent the finest military power in galactic history, announced Supreme Admiral Vextera, the Confederation's highest-ranking military officer. 50,000 warships, 1 million support vessels, planetary defense systems that can withstand direct stellar bombardment. She paused, her expression grim. Against the Devourers, our analysts estimate we have a 17% chance of protecting even a single star system. The silence that followed this announcement was deafening. 17%. The combined military might of 47 advanced civilizations, and their best-case scenario was saving less than 1/5 of their territory. There has to be something we can do, protested the Zephyrian representative. Some strategy, some weapon, some alliance we can form. Against a conventional enemy, yes, Supreme Admiral Vextera replied. But this isn't conventional warfare. The Devourers don't follow any tactical doctrine we understand. They don't have supply lines to disrupt, command structures to target, or even individual units that can be defeated. They're more like a galaxy-consuming virus than an army. That's when Ambassador Chun Wei stood up. Request permission to address the council, she said quietly. Supreme Admiral Vextera looked surprised. Ambassador, while we appreciate human concerns about this crisis, military strategy is not typically a diplomatic matter. With respect, Admiral, this stopped being a military matter the moment conventional strategy became inadequate, Chun replied. If the Confederation is willing to consider unconventional approaches to an unconventional threat, humanity would like to offer assistance. The council chamber buzzed with nervous conversation. After the revelations about human special forces, most species had maintained a careful distance from human military affairs. The idea of relying on human assistance for galactic defense was both appealing and terrifying. General Keth Morg spoke from the Corellian delegation. Ambassador, what exactly is humanity proposing? Chun activated a holographic display that showed the current disposition of human forces throughout Confederation territory. What the display revealed surprised everyone in the chamber. For the past 3 years, humanity has been positioning specialized response teams at strategic locations throughout the galaxy, Chun announced. Teams trained specifically for scenarios involving existential threats that cannot be addressed through conventional military action. The display showed dozens of human installations that had been constructed in secret, staffed by personnel whose existence had never been officially acknowledged, equipped with resources that most species didn't even know humans possessed. You've been preparing for this specific threat, Admiral Vextera asked. We've been preparing for any threat that could destroy galactic civilization, Chun corrected. The Devourers are simply the first one to actually manifest. Prime Breaker Vextera's psychic presence intensified as he examined the human installation data. The scope of this preparation is extraordinary. How long have you been planning this response? Since the day we joined the Confederation, Chun replied. We knew that eventually something like this would happen. We just didn't know when or what form it would take. Master Writer HFY flickered between states as she processed the implications. What are you proposing, Ambassador? How can humanity address a threat that our combined forces cannot handle? Chen's expression grew serious. By doing what human special forces have always done, by changing the rules of engagement entirely. The holographic display shifted to show tactical projections that made the assembled delegates gasp. Instead of attempting to fight the Devourers directly, the human plan involves something far more audacious. We're going to infiltrate them, Chun announced. The council chamber erupted in chaos as representatives from dozens of species began speaking at once. The idea was so outrageous, so completely outside conventional military thinking, that many delegates simply couldn't process it. Impossible, shouted the Hellion representative. The Devourers are biomechanical entities the size of small moons. You can't infiltrate something like that. With respect, Chen replied calmly. Every biological system, no matter how large or complex, has vulnerabilities that can be exploited by sufficiently skilled operatives. Admiral Vexteral leaned forward. Ambassador, please explain exactly what you're proposing. Chen activated another section of the holographic display. The Devourers consume matter by breaking it down at the molecular level and rebuilding it according to their own patterns. But, like any biological process, this requires specific conditions, catalysts, and regulatory mechanisms. The display showed detailed analyses of Devourer physiology that had been gathered through methods Chen didn't elaborate on. The level of detail suggested that human operatives had somehow managed to get close.